Someone's family tree stretches back 60,000 years. No paper, no archives, just song. And in 1869, a government decided it needed to stop. My family tree hits a dead end at 1870. I spent weeks trying to break through it, scrolling through census records and ship manifests, watching names disappear into bureaucratic silence. Yours probably stopped somewhere around the same period, too. Most do. The records simply vanish, or they were never made to begin with, or they were swallowed by fires, floods, and the quiet chaos of history. I had come to accept this as just the nature of genealogy. We trace our lines back a few generations, maybe a dozen if we are fortunate, and then the trail goes cold. But there are people whose family tree reaches back 60,000 years, not through paper, not through archives, through song. They sang their ancestors into memory. They sang maps across an entire continent. They sang the locations of water, safe passages, and sacred ground. And they did it with such precision that modern marine geologists have confirmed their songs accurately described coastlines that have been underwater for over 10,000 years. That is 12 times longer than written history has existed. 400 generations of unbroken oral transmission, precise enough to survive scientific scrutiny. And in 1869, someone decided it needed to end. I found this by accident. I was researching how institutions controlled children in the mid-1800s, specifically the American Orphan Train movement, which shipped 250,000 children from eastern cities to rural communities between 1854 and 1929. The pattern troubled me. Children pulled from their families under the banner of protection. Children put on display at train stops in events that functioned like auctions. Children cut off from everything they came from, expected to become entirely someone else. Then I noticed the dates overlapping with something happening on the opposite side of the planet. Australia, 1869, the Aboriginal Protection Act. The first sweeping colonial legislation granting the government total authority over indigenous lives, including, and this is the part that matters, the care, custody, and education of children. Not just orphans, all children. I pulled on that thread, and what came apart was a knowledge system so sophisticated that calling it primitive tells you far more about the person using that word than about the system itself. Let me explain what songlines actually are, because the name makes them sound simple. They are not simple. A songline is a navigation route encoded inside a song that can stretch thousands of kilometers across a continent. The melody itself describes the terrain you are moving through. The rhythm marks distance. Shifts in pitch signal elevation changes. The lyrics name landmarks, water sources, seasonal food locations, areas to avoid, and boundaries between territories. By singing the song in the correct order, a person could travel across deserts, through mountain ranges, and between the lands of different peoples without ever having physically made that journey before. One documented songline runs 3,500 kilometers from the central desert to the east coast, to the place now called Byron Bay. That is roughly the distance from New York to Los Angeles. An oral map encoded in music, carried and passed down without writing for tens of thousands of years. Here's where it becomes stranger. Before colonization, Australia had more than 250 distinct Aboriginal languages and roughly 800 dialects. These were not minor variations. They were fully separate languages with their own grammars, vocabularies, and structures. Yet the songlines crossed all of them. When a songline entered the territory of a different language group, that section of the song was sung in that language. Different peoples maintained different segments of the same continental navigation system, handing it off to travelers like a living passport. How is that possible? The melody transcends language. The geographic information is embedded in the musical structure, not just the words.
Different groups could recognize the same songline because the tune described the land, and the land does not change. This was not one tribe's knowledge. This was a continental network sustained through cooperation across 250 distinct peoples across thousands of years. Think about what that implies about the organizational capacity of cultures we were taught to call primitive. Now here is where I expected my own skepticism to push back. Oral traditions are supposed to be unreliable. Memory fades, stories get stretched, details drift across generations. 60,000 years of unbroken transmission should be impossible. The standard academic position would be that these are mythologies with cultural meaning, but no literal accuracy. So I went looking for evidence against it. What I found instead was confirmation. Professor Patrick Nunn, a geographer from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and Nicholas Reed, a linguist from the University of New England, analyzed 18 Aboriginal oral histories describing coastal flooding. These stories, gathered from all around Australia's coastline, all describe the ocean rising over land that was once dry. Critically, not one of them describes the reverse, seas receding to reveal new territory. The researchers cross-referenced these accounts with geological data on post-Ice Age sea level rise. The stories matched. Accounts from the Yidinji people near Cairns described a time when Fitzroy Island was still connected to the mainland, and when Green Island offshore was 4 times larger than it is today. They name specific underwater landmarks with remembered cultural associations. Sea level data confirmed that description was accurate between 10,000 and 13,000 years ago. Reed called it, and I'll paraphrase, staggering to consider that a story could be carried intact for 10,000 years. But the most recent confirmation is the one I keep coming back to. In 2024, marine geologist Michael Leary discovered ancient watering holes sitting 14 meters underwater off the coast of Western Australia. He showed a digital model of these submerged features to a group of First Nations elders. An elder named Timmy Douglas became immediately animated. He recognized the watering holes as part of a songline he had carried his entire life.
Timmy Douglas had never seen that terrain. No living person had. The ocean had claimed it 7,000 years ago, but his song remembered it exactly. He knew those features from a song passed down across 400 unbroken generations. The song preserved what the sea had erased. Maybe I am connecting things that are not connected. Maybe the scientific alignment is coincidence. Maybe 18 separate oral histories from around an entire continental coastline just happen to match geological records by chance. Maybe the underwater archaeology finding Aboriginal artifacts exactly where the songs said people lived is nothing more than luck. But in 2020, researchers from Flinders University published the first confirmed ancient underwater Aboriginal archaeological sites from the Australian continental shelf. They found stone tools, grinding stones, and evidence of human habitation at depths down to 14 meters below current sea level. Physical evidence that people lived exactly where the songs said they lived. The oral histories were not metaphor, they were memory. So now I have to ask a different question. Not whether the system worked, because marine geology confirms it did. The question is, what happened to it? And this is where 1869 becomes impossible to ignore. Victoria's Aboriginal Protection Act of 1869 created a board with extraordinary powers over Indigenous lives. By 1871, regulations stated that the governor could order the removal of any Aboriginal child to missions or reformatory schools. Not orphans, any child. By 1886, forced removals from missions accelerated. By 1905, in Western Australia, the Chief Protector became the legal guardian of every Aboriginal and half-caste child under 16, whether or not their parents were alive and present. Let me say that plainly. A government official was made the legal guardian of every Indigenous child in an entire territory simply by the operation of law.
In 1915, New South Wales passed legislation giving authorities the power to remove Aboriginal children without needing to prove in court that they were neglected. Researchers examining board records from this period found that the stated reason for many removals was simply for being Aboriginal. Children were forbidden from speaking their languages, forbidden from practicing their culture, placed in institutions or white households with the explicit objective of assimilation. Official estimates say that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 3 Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families between roughly 1910 and 1970. This became known as the stolen generations. Now look at the American dates again. Orphan trains ran from 1854 to 1929. Australia's removal policies ran from 1869 to 1969. Overlapping time frames, same mechanism, different continents. The pattern repeats with uncomfortable precision. Target the children, who are the transmission points of culture. Remove them from the people who carry the knowledge. Claim it is for their good. Forbid them from practicing what their families taught them. Within a single generation, knowledge that took thousands of years to build simply disappears. 250,000 American children shipped west, countless Aboriginal children removed to missions and white homes. In both cases, the goal, explicit or implicit, was to sever the chain of cultural transmission. You do not burn libraries when the libraries are songs. You silence the singers. You take the children who would have learned. Before 1788, Australia had over 250 distinct languages. Today, fewer than 150 remain in daily use. 90% of those are considered endangered. Only 13 are still being passed on to children. When a language dies, the songlines encoded inside it do not get written down somewhere. They simply end. Navigation routes spanning a continent, ecological knowledge preserving 10,000 years of environmental change, water sources for surviving one of Earth's most unforgiving landscapes, legal frameworks for cooperation across dozens of territories, memory systems precise enough to be verified by modern science, gone. Not lost to time, removed by policy, silenced within living memory. Once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. The coordinated targeting of child-to-elder transmission in multiple places during the same era. The framing of removal as protection and uplift. The particular vulnerability of oral cultures, cultures where knowledge lived inside people rather than inside archives. The efficiency of it. You do not need to destroy every record. You only need one generation of silence. What if the oldest continuous knowledge system on Earth was not simply lost to the march of progress? What if someone understood precisely where cultural memory lives and exactly how to extinguish it? I am not making accusations. I am noting that the orphan trains and the stolen generations share mechanisms, time frames, and outcomes. I am noting that both targeted children as the living carriers of cultural continuity. I am noting that oral cultures were uniquely exposed, and that in Australia, a system confirmed by marine geology to be accurate across 10,000 years was fractured within 1 century of colonial contact. The songlines are still being sung. Recovery is ongoing. Many modern Australian highways follow the ancient routes, the same paths colonizers dismissed as animal tracks. Some knowledge survives, but how much was permanently lost? How many navigation routes went quiet when the children who would have learned them were taken to missions? How many languages encoding survival knowledge for some of Earth's most demanding terrain died when their last fluent speakers passed on without anyone left to teach? I keep returning to Timmy Douglas in his 90s, recognizing underwater watering holes from a song. He knew terrain swallowed by the ocean 7,000 years ago because someone sang it to him, who had it sung to them across 400 unbroken generations. And I think about what was broken, not gradually over deep time, deliberately, within decades, by policy and legislation, and the removal of children from their families under the stated justification of protection. Whether it was inland 100 kilometers or out 100 kilometers, we still lived here, said Vince Adams, a senior Yindabarndi lawman. We still have the story to tell you. But who decided those stories needed to stop? And what else vanished that we will never even know we lost?